Are you sick of hearing misinformed people say that the Glen Co massacre was committed by the Campbells? Me too. Today, I'm going to tell you about one of the most hard-nosed, hands-on culprits, not just what he did on that fateful night, but the incredible story of what he did afterwards. If you're interested in the people, places and events in Scottish history, then click the subscribe button at the bottom right of the screen. And if you enjoy the video, give a thumbs up and share with others like you. In the meantime, let me tell you a story. I've been doing a series of videos in Glen Co's famous Clachig bar, trying to see past the myths and manipulations of that event to find out what happened to the various people involved when all the killing was done. And today, I want to look at what happened to the junior officer who communicated the orders and ensured their enforcement, and who, after it was all over, has the most astounding story of all our subjects. This is one not to be missed. Captain Thomas Duncanson. Duncanson? You mean not a Campbell? No. He wasn't even from Argyll. He was a professional soldier from Perthshire, my neck of the woods. Even if he hadn't been one of the key shadowy figures in the slaughter of Glen Co, his later life would have made a Hollywood adventure movie in itself. But before we get to that, let me give you 3 quick snippets that let you understand how deep he was in the plot to extirpate the MacDonalds of Glen Co. After William of Orange's military success in Ireland and in Scotland, he still needed to enforce obedience amongst those Highland chiefs still loyal to the king that he'd ousted. They were given a deadline of the 1st of January 1692 to sign a document of submission and allegiance. MacDonald of Glen Co had tried to go to Fort William to make his submission, but the governor there told him he had to go to Inveraray. Now, I'm sure you all know that he was destined not to make it in time. And this would be the pretext for the Earl of Argyll's regiment to be billeted on the MacDonalds before murdering them in the night. What you might easily have forgotten is that one of the things that contributed to the late signing was that en route to Inveraray, the MacDonald chief and his escort were accosted by some of those Argyll soldiers, and in spite of a letter from the governor of Fort William setting out the purpose of his travelling, those soldiers locked him up just long enough to delay him a while. The captain who detained and locked him up was our very own Captain Thomas Drummond. He was already creating the conditions for what would come later. And just over a month later, when it had been decided to ignore the MacDonald submission, when some of the Argylls were in Glen Co enjoying hospitality, and when orders had been given by the king, passed down from the Secretary of State for Scotland to the Deputy Governor of the Fort, and from him to the officer in command of the Argylls, the man that was chosen to take the order across from North Ballyhoolish to Glen Co was our Captain Thomas Drummond. On the eve of the massacre, it was he who put the orders into the hands of Robert Campbell of Glenlyon. More than that, as the slaughter was being carried out in one of the townships, 9 MacDonalds had been held, hands tied, and as the Argylls executed them one by one, the last was a young man of 20. And when a document was found promising him the protection of the governor of Fort William, even Campbell of Glenlyon balked and thought to spare him. And then Thomas Drummond stepped into the scene demanding, "Why is he still alive? What of our orders? Kill him." When no one moved, Drummond raised his pistol and shot the young man through the head. As a perpetrator at Glen Co, Drummond had two bona fides. But what of his life afterwards? Now, just before I tell you about Drummond's post-Glencoe life, let me remind you that I'll be coming to Glencoe with a group of up to 25 people as part of my autumn 11-day tour of Scotland. Now, we're not just going to Glencoe. I'll take you to the Isle of Mull, Iona, Inverness, St Andrews and Edinburgh. I'll show you Loch Lomond and Loch Ness. I'll put on a comedy show and we'll end it all with a fantastic ceilidh. Now, more than half the seats are gone, but if you'd like to be one of the exclusive group to come on this wonderful trip, including full board, entry fees, and me as your guide, then either click the link top right or the one in the description below, or email alexis@scotlandhistorytours.co.uk. Well, 17 months later, Drummond found himself and his company given the suicidal job of marching in the vanguard to take a redoubt under heavy fire in King William's War in Flanders. Very few survived, but Thomas Drummond did. It was some time before the numbers had rebuilt, and presumably the guilt of commanders had subsided before the regiment was in action again. But 2 years later, he and his company were involved in the notorious siege of Dickersmude, which not only do I not have time to discuss, I can't even pronounce it properly. 2 years after that, part of which was as a French prisoner of war, the regiment was disbanded and he was a civilian again. Now, you might think that that's enough excitement for one lifetime, but this story is barely started. You see, Anglo-Scottish merchants in London saw everyone else in Europe crossing oceans, stealing land and making a big bag of cash. They were particularly jealous of the monopoly of the East India Company. They wanted in on the act and decided that it would be a clever wheeze to sail to Panama, take the narrow isthmus of land between the Atlantic and Pacific, and charge folks to transport goods across the narrow gap. Imagine if the Panama Canal was of vital interest. King William signed off an Act of Parliament that set up the Company of Scotland trading with Africa and the Indies. This was the Darien expedition. Da, da, da! Anyway, Drummond wanted a position with the military companies that provided the backbone that would be needed to fight Spanish and natives when they got to the mosquito-infested jungle that was going to make shareholders rich. The thing is that folks still remembered Glen Co, and Drummond's part in it made him persona non grata in polite society. People objected to his involvement. Now, it so happens that there weren't one, but two Captain Drummonds. Captain Thomas Drummond, the Glen Co murderer that we've been talking about, and his brother, Captain Robert Drummond, a sea captain and naval adventurer. He'd been sailing American waters based out of Boston, defying English navigation acts, which placed an embargo on Scottish and other merchants trading with Atlantic colonies. So, Captain Robert Drummond, sea captain and naval adventurer, had been given the job of captaining the ship Caledonia that would sail to Panama. He wrangled it so that his MacDonald murdering brother could indeed be one of the military support for the journey that set off from Leith on July the 14th, 1698. To cut a long story into a promotion for a future video, I've always avoided covering the Darien expedition because A, it's just too long a subject, and B, it's a bit of a political hot potato. But it occurs to me I might be able to do a series a bit like this one, where I tell a series of individuals' tales to make up the whole. Let me know in the comment section if you'd like that, and if there's enough comments, we'll look at doing that in the future. Very briefly, it was a disaster. A bunch of ships went out with poorly chosen trading goods, plus King William had threatened his English subjects with all sorts of punishments if they dared to trade with the Scots, his other subjects. As a soldier in King William's army, Thomas Drummond knew about fortifications, and so he got the job of building the colony's Fort St Andrew. Just about everyone died of disease or fighting the Spanish, and a year later, of the 1,200 who left Leith, the two Drummond boys sailed the 250 survivors to New York. Captain Sailor Drummond then took the bulk of the survivors back to Scotland, whilst on the 20th of September 1699, MacDonald murdering soldier Captain Drummond, who had saved the cannon from the original expedition, headed back to Darien with a small group in anticipation of the second wave of ships due to come from Scotland. He's starting to look like a bit of a hero, isn't he? When the second flotilla of 4 ships arrived from Scotland, there was a bit of debate about what to do next. Thomas Drummond wants to keep going. Now, he's seen all the death that's gone before. But as we've seen earlier, this is a guy who's used to killing innocents and risking his own life in the face of withering French fire. It's agreed that they'll split the men into 2 groups. Half will make a landing, with the rest being sent to Jamaica in the meantime. But Drummond suggests a much bolder plan. Since the Spanish are bound to attack at some point, he wants to take 150 volunteers, travel through the jungle, hook up with the natives, and go and kick the crap out of the Spanish before they come to kick the crap out of us. But the decision makers think it's a bit too bold. There was a big hoo-ha, and Drummond spends a bit of time locked up in the brig. When the Panama thing had all gone sour and they're all back in Scotland, the guy who opposed Drummond and put him in irons is himself judged to be the baddie. Thomas Drummond is back in the game. Of course, the Scots have lost loads of cash on the whole Panama escapade, but they have to soldier on. And Captain Robert Seaman Drummond suggests a cheap way to make a bit of cash. He, along with Glen Co Drummond and a few crew, will head off with one of the refurbished ships. They'll sail round the African coast to sell some goods and bring back gold in return. Maybe even found a trading colony on the African coast. Scunnial. Off they sail, and all goes well. To start with, they make it to the Indian Ocean, swapped European goods with English pirates off Madagascar for stuff the pirates had stolen from the East India Company. And they may have got some slaves from Madagascar for the plantations. Now, the sensible thing would be to offload the cargo and then head back to Scotland with a profit to start a new round of trade. Let's put aside the moral questions just for a bit. But instead of the sensible approach, they decided to pocket the cash and do a deal with a shipwrecked pirate to attack an English East India ship. One way or another, the deal went sour, and the Captain Drummond twins ended up stranded on an island in the Indian Ocean, and that's where they died. Perthshire man Captain Thomas Drummond had contrived an excuse to delay the Glen Co chief, murdered MacDonald's on behalf of the Crown, survived his own regiment's slaughter for the sake of that Crown, valiantly fought to build a Scottish colony in Panama before sailing to rescue the company, flirting with pirates and dying ignominiously in the Indian Ocean. So when I say I get frustrated at misinformed people saying that the Glen Co massacre was committed by the Campbells, Are you starting to see what I mean? Of course, as captain of dragoons in the Argylls, Thomas Drummond had only carried out orders given from above. So who was it that these orders had been passed down from? Was that guy a Campbell? The only way to find out is to watch the video that I made about his role. That video is coming up on screen now. Support the channel by clicking top right to become a Patreon member, or buy me a coffee in the description below. In the meantime, ha mi an dóchas gún bí lam alai. Sherry and Drasta.